Welcome to the Tea Grannies. I'm Elise.
And I'm Maria. Today we're going to chat about where writers go wrong when it comes to writing animals, both real and imaginary. So pour yourself a cup of tea and let's get started.
Elise stared unseeingly at her reflection. With sweat beading on her forehead and trickling down her spine, her bathroom felt pleasantly cool. Her flushed skin was, for once, since she'd moved in, grateful for the drafty old rental. Moving day. The normally gloomy sky was on its best behavior. Bright beams of sunlight sent dizzying waves of excitement through Elise's body. Or perhaps anxiety was a better word. She'd been awake and dressed since before dawn, coaching herself through the day. 4 guys from the moving company, 2 trucks. Boxes, color-coded by what would follow her to her new home and what wouldn't. Easy peasy. Elise threw up into the toilet for the 3rd time that morning. She'd kept her favorite kettle unpacked for as long as was reasonable, but eventually it too had to be carefully wrapped up and surrendered to a temporary cardboard tomb. No chamomile tea to soothe her roiling stomach today. Pull yourself together, Elise admonished. The movers would be arriving any minute. 4 guys, 2 trucks. Easy peasy. She flushed the toilet and then rinsed her mouth in the sink. If only she had something to do with her hands. She felt her nails automatically seeking loose threads on her clothes, that uneven section of grout, her own cuticles. Fidget toys just weren't good enough. She needed something to fix or to destroy. If she weren't so stressed, that would have been an interesting topic to research for a few hours. Why were destruction and restoration so closely linked? Try as she might, she couldn't focus on the question. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. 4 guys. 2 trucks. Easy peasy.
All right. So this submission, I love the name choice. We love an Elise in our life. And I really loved the descriptions, but there was something missing for me in the introductory paragraph. I feel like I don't get enough setting, but the character's anxiety feels so strong that it kind of works, because a lot of the time when you're feeling very anxious, you're not very in tune with your environment. So it does sort of work in that way. And the anxiety was felt by the main character in this piece. I thought was very well done. Flushed skin, sweat trickling down her spine, like coaching herself through regular steps that would seem like no big deal to someone without anxiety. All very well done. The only real issue I had with this piece is I have no idea where it's going. So why is she moving? Is there a reason it's giving her such anxiety, such as like she's trying to get away from like an asshole ex-partner? Is it a glimpse into her day-to-day life and her anxiety level? Of course, back cover copies would explain this kind of stuff to us, but I would at least like to see a sentence to see why Elise is so anxious and she's being driven to moving when she clearly doesn't seem that keen on it. So that's pretty much my thoughts on that one. Again, the anxiety was well done. I thought this was well written too. And I had a laugh at packing up the kettle last so you can always have tea, because relatable.
I agree with all of those thoughts, Maria. And I also was thinking, so there's a lot of agents and editors that talk about kind of starting your story with tropes like waking up. And this one starts with looking in a mirror. And the author doesn't go so far as to describe herself, like what she looks like in the mirror, which is kind of where that tipping point is for that trope. But I felt like it was a pretty easy edit just to remove that altogether, so you just avoid it. And she can just start with being in the bathroom and feeling unwell and all of those like really well described anxiety feelings. And yeah, other than that was kind of my comments, was just I would like to see, you know, what's next, like a hint of what's next and what's coming next after this move and why she's moving.
Yeah, this is a short and sweet one, I think, in terms of our comments. Because I don't have anything to add beyond what's already been said. The anxiety descriptions are all too relatable. Thanks for naming the character my name. I feel that really, really deeply. And I don't think I've talked about it on the show much, but like I've moved a lot in my life. So this was, you know, all the triggers everywhere. But it was, yeah, the anxiety was really, really well written. The descriptions are just very, very effective for what it's very relatable, like Maria said, basically. The one note I had that stands out is whenever someone has nausea like that, I automatically assume, oh, are they pregnant? Morning sickness. So if that's not an assumption you want the reader making, it could be good to clear that up. And I think the piece that we all feel is kind of missing here in terms of direction of like, why is she so anxious? If we get a hint of that, that kind of, that would help reduce the suspicion about pregnancy. So I think that would be enough.
I agree. I think that would really help. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah,
right,
I would love to keep reading because
Mhm.
I just want to know what she's so anxious about. Like, I'm
Me
very
too.
curious. It's pretty intense. I want to know what the reason is. So
I'm like, hey, been there, done that. Not really about moving, so I'm curious.
yeah, I have been there about moving, so you know, it could be that. To start off, I am going to introduce you again to the most educated person in the room. You heard Maya giving feedback on the first page in the last segment, and we've had her on the show before. She is the best. She is the coolest. She's getting uncomfortable because I'm saying nice things. But yeah, Maya is a writer. She is represented by an agent who I forget the name of. So she's
Caitlin Sanchez at Bradford Literary.
That's the one. And she also knows a heck ton about animals because that's what she's educated in. And she's worked at the zoo and she knows so much stuff. So welcome, Maya.
Thank you.
All right. And now we'll jump into why is writing animals important? Well, we don't live in a world without wildlife. 100 years from now, maybe, when the world's finished burning. That was dark. Sorry, guys. But as for now, there's lots of living organisms around us, and you should include them in your story. If you're in sci-fi, maybe they're more like monsters, but we're talking kind of fantasy, regular fiction, that kind of stuff here. So as an animal person, it will take me right out of the story if the animals don't act like animals. Even more so when the main character has like a dog and they play fetch with it once and then nothing, and they like take off on vacation for 2 weeks and there's no where's the dog? Like, who's taking care of this pet for you? Like, if you have pets, they're a pretty big commitment. So if a character has a pet, that should show in the writing. Yeah, and I could argue it's a consistency issue within the book, but I think we all know it just bothers me when people forget about their animals. And there's so many great stories out there that also have things like shape-shifting characters, werewolves, things like that. So writing animals is a lot more important than you may realize.
I'm going to be largely silent in this discussion because I have the least knowledge on this topic. But I do want to jump in for those of us who get overwhelmed by the details and want to get everything right. And, everything Maria just said is very true and very good, and also makes me very nervous that, oh no, if I put a dog in the story, I better get it right. I think it's helpful to remind us that it doesn't have to be perfect, and you don't have to have the level of knowledge that people like Maya and Maria have in order to do this well. And I like to think about it in terms of how I think about world building and making a setting feel real. It's not about knowing everything about the setting and traveling somewhere so that I feel like I can describe it exactly how I saw it in real life. It's about taking some key details, like some kind of sense of smell, of sight, of hearing, and adding in a few here and there so that it feels like it jumps out to the reader and feels real without going into an exorbitant amount of detail. So it's about finding those key things that you want to highlight that might stand out a little bit and make it feel more real, and then going from there. And that should be all you need. But you're also welcome to jump right in and become obsessed with the topic, because some people love doing that. So do that if you prefer.
Yeah, world building your animals is just as important as your setting, characters, magic systems, just to keep your story grounded and keep your readers immersed, because that's what we all want as writers, is to keep our readers engaged and not have them thrown out of the story because we forgot that wolves have paws or some other minor detail.
Okay, I love that. Because the thing that I was going to get into, one of the mistakes I see a lot, I need to know what the writers of all these dragon books are thinking. Those enormous creatures require a lot of calories to eat and a lot of water. And where do they poop? Their poop must be huge. Where is it? Where's the poop? So I know we don't need to have the nitty gritty of everything all the way down to their bathroom habits. But I got to say, when I'm reading this books and they're like, oh, we keep these dragons in a pit. I'm like, okay, in a pit of their shit? Like who's going in there to clean their cages and stuff? Like I have questions. And how many sheep do you have to feed them a day to make sure they get the right calories? And then like, it's just a whole thing. So these are the kind of questions that kind of run through my head. So I do like a little detail because like, I know we're talking fantasy. I know we're talking about dragons, but like they're still an animal with needs, just like any other animal. And it just kind of drives me insane when we get no information about their care and stuff like that. Like, but you know, anyways, without further ado, let's jump into our questions.
All right. So that's my job. First question. What is a common issue you see when it comes to writing animals in fiction?
I would say unrealistic behavior, and Elise and Maria know this from my critiques in writing group, but one of my biggest pet peeves is when ambush predators, and dinosaurs do this a lot in those old nature documentaries, they'll like stand at the top of the hill where their prey is down below and they'll roar really, really loud before charging in. And that is just not a realistic hunting strategy because it sends them scattering and running the prey, and then the ambush predator, the big predator, has to run farther to catch the prey. I don't think there's any animal alive that uses that type of strategy. So that's a really big pet peeve of mine. And it's kind of like, you know, there's a minimum distance, for example, that leopards need to stalk their prey before they can like make a attempt to go run after it. And if they are heard or seen within that time and the prey takes off, they'll just give up and try again. So I think just trying to research your animals better, know your animals a little bit better, even if you have to extrapolate because they're fictional or we don't have some of that historical knowledge. That would be the common issue I see, is just kind of unrealistic behavior, things that animals do where you're like, really? Is that how they behave? And Maria might have some for the more domestic side of things.
Yes, I'm a little bit more well-versed in domestic animals. But yeah, I would say them not acting correctly is definitely one of the things that gets me. Like if there's a cat in a story and it's always perfectly behaving, I'm like, come on, be for real. Have you ever had a cat? I have 2 kittens and they're 6 months and they go from being like the most adorable, cuddly little angels. You're like, I would die for this tiny little animal. And then 10 minutes later, you're like using the squirt bottle and you're like, like, you know what I mean? So it's not realistic if they're always perfectly behaved. That's one thing that gets me. And this comes up a lot in fantasy too, because horses are often used as transportation. And I won't get all the way into my horse rant because there's a whole episode on it called Where Writers Go Wrong, the equine edition. So I'm not going to yap too much about that. But one of the things people do with horses especially is they treat them like cars, and they can even be like fantasy animals. Like there's a book I've read, like the animal was sort of inspired by horses, but like it wasn't actually a real horse, and it was treated like a car in a fantasy world. I'm like, listen, they don't have cars. They don't know what a car is. They're not going to treat this animal like a car. And they've, you know, the other thing you have to remember is like these characters have lived in this world with these animals their whole lives. So like they're going to be a little bit more knowledgeable about how it's going to go. They're not going to act like a person in our world being plopped into their world. So that's something to remember as well. And the other thing that kind of gets me again about the car thing, animals have souls and personality and feelings and preferences. So pretending that they're just kind of a vessel for your plot or as a plot device doesn't work for me. It kind of turns me right off of the writing usually. So yeah. And in terms of, again, with the unrealistic behavior, it's like when the dragon comes down and like roars and like all the horses stand there. Like horses are flight animals. They are getting the fuck out of there. They are not hanging around for that dragon. If you stay on, good for you. But the chances are you're going to get tossed. That's the other thing we don't see a lot of in books is people falling off their horse. It happens a lot, okay?
Okay, but that's a nice segue. So speaking of dragons, how can a writer portray size and scale for larger animals? I don't know if there's anything. I mean, some people do dragons small. I've read a book that did like small dog-sized dragons, which is pretty fun.
Very cute.
But typically they're pretty big. And I think that might be the biggest, like, other than horses, we don't see a whole lot of really big ones, but people do dragons a lot. So how can we do that in a way that makes sense?
Yeah, there's that saying that's like, comparison is the thief of joy. And I think when it comes to writing animals, that is not true. You need to compare. I think as a writer, you can decide, like Elise was saying, are your dragons small? Are they the size of dogs? Or are they like the size of a brontosaurus? And I think once you've made that decision, that can inform your research and how to describe your dragon. Like, if it's the size of a brontosaurus, look up in natural history museums what the scale is of a human standing next to a brontosaurus skeleton. You know, get that kind of like, could I be crushed by its foot? Or if it's more the size of a mammoth, would that just lead to a broken leg if they stepped on me or something like that, right? So you're gonna have to make a choice about what you want your dragon or your fictional animal to look like, and then you can hopefully find a real life comparison that can kind of ground the scale for you.
That's clever.
Yeah, and I think with size and scale, it's important to use something in the character's world as a scale. Like, I mean, if we're writing, because a lot of time we're talking writing fantasy, you can't be like, this dragon was as big as a building. So you're going to have to come up with something in the world that you've already kind of established as being large, and then be like, oh, it's bigger than the castle or whatever. Like, it doesn't, have to do it that way, but that's one of the things you can do. And I think word choice is pretty important too for making the size come across as like the reader can really get an idea. But yeah, I don't usually write giant creatures because I hate trying to describe things that are ginormous like that. It's hard.
Yeah. What comparison can you use? Like, I'm even thinking like, okay, this dragon's as big as a house, but whose house? There's tiny, teeny houses and there's massive mansion houses. So you have to be a little bit more specific than that. But I really like the idea of like finding a animal reference in a museum or something, and oftentimes the prehistoric animals and dinosaurs and things, they'll have that scale of like, how big would this actually be if you put it next to a human? That's really helpful. So thanks for that hot tip. Next question: what kind of research would help writers improve their animal descriptions and actions?
Oh, this gets my nerdy little heart quite happy. I would say research real things. And I love reading scientific papers, watching nature documentaries, like going to a zoo, observing things. But it's kind of like, if you want dragons in your world, study dinosaurs and birds and reptiles, and think about, like what kind of issues, like Maria was saying earlier, just like what kind of care issues would they have, and what kind of, like if they're wild dragons, that's one thing, but if they're being kept in like a dragon stable, then they're going to need to be taken care of, like things like if they have a scaly body, what kind of issues come up with scales. And you can draw inspiration from things like lizards and snakes, where it's like they have a shed every month and that requires a lot of humidity and moisture, or else it can go wrong for them. And I mean, I would say that if that is an important part of your plot line, then that could be a character conflict, right? Like your dragon that you care about is not shedding properly, and so you have to figure out how to solve that. Like the character needs to like come to the rescue of this like beloved dragon. But if it's not a central part of your plot line, it can just help ground your story in real details. But I would say really try to think, okay, what is this creature that I'm trying to create, and what is the most similar real world thing that we have that we can then compare. Same if you're writing a story about like a forest ecosystem with a bunch of magical creatures. Well, how does them like eating the seeds, lighting the forest on fire, like all those kinds of things that we have real life examples of on our current planet with all the real animals, like what do they do and what does that effect have on the ecosystem? And then you can extrapolate from there.
Okay, I love that. Also strongly recommend watching Planet Earth, like the good one, because that is a really good inspiration if you're looking for ideas for your animals in your story. And it helps get an idea of like different species, how they move and interact with their environment, because that's huge. And I mean, if you can interact with real life animals, that's even better. If you don't have pets, like, all right, that must be lonely.
Hey.
Or really not as stressful as my life. So there's also that. So if there's someone that you know that has animals that you can kind of invite yourself over and interact with them, that's really good too. But things to pay attention to, like when you're watching videos or documentaries or whatever, how do they move? You know, what's their fur like? What's the texture, the color? Are they glossy? Are they not glossy? What's their fur pattern? Like different animals have different patterns. Like cats have tons of different coat patterns. So do horses, so do dogs. So that's something you could also throw in. And then their eyes, I think, are the most important thing to pay attention to, because I think wild animals, you'll notice, like if you're watching the documentary, they have a different kind of expression in their eyes than a domestic pet does. And domestic animals tend to follow you with their eyes more. So if you're talking about house pets, or, you know, your dragon is like bonded to you and it's obsessed with you or whatever, they will often follow you with their eyes, and they will have different expressions in their eyes that you can see. So you can tell, like, I mean, Maggie's a great example because she's a very expressive dog, and I like to use her as an example. She has like big googly eyes, and they're so cute. She looks like an emoji. So when she's really excited and or she wants food, her pupils are so big, you like can't even see the colors of her eyes. And when she's sleeping and her eyes are like half open, then you can see the color of her eyes. So that kind of stuff too. And different animals too with different people will respond and move differently, act differently. And that's, I think, something that people miss when they're writing about animals. This goes back to my car complaint, is like they don't think about the bond between the pet and the owner, how the pet is or the animal is with the owner, whoever they're bonded with. They're going to behave differently than with strangers. So that's something else to consider as well.
I think this might be one of the questions I'm really curious about is, are there certain animals that writers have more trouble with than others? And if so, which ones?
I couldn't think of like specific animals. My mind went to more of like a group, and that would be like large predators. I think people, like, you know, we have lions, we have tigers, nature documentaries. People love watching those. People love seeing them in captivity, or like if you go on safari, you can see them in the wild. Like they're very captivating. And so like as writers, we want to include them in our stories. But I think their hunting methods are so unique, the way they like interact with the world. Like domestication has not always been possible for like a lot of them. So it's just like they're a bit of a mystery. And I think that mystery sort of leads people to not be able to write larger predators very well. Sometimes they're overly aggressive. Like I think even larger predators, like a bear is not a bear, right? A black bear is a omnivore, and they're very strong and powerful and big, but they're way more timid than a grizzly bear. And a grizzly bear is territorially aggressive, whereas like a polar bear is aggressive in a different way. So a bear is not a bear. But I think that can be challenging, is writing large predators and figuring out kind of like, is this the type of animal that will inherently attack anything that moves, or are they more elusive? Lots of real life animals to study, like snow leopards that are really hard to spot, but are also predators. Like a predator is not always the same. And I think they kind of get typecast in a way in books as always being these like vicious sort of eat anything that moves, kind of, you got to watch out. And some of them are like that and some of them aren't. So I think in fiction, you kind of like, again, it has to be a choice. You need to decide which animals are going to be like that and why, and try to back it up with real research, and try not to make all your predators like snarling, angry meat eaters.
Well, yeah, that's so interesting to me because like you were saying with the dinosaurs too, like the dinosaurs standing on the hill and roaring. Like, again, if you watch the nature documentaries, like the way predators hunt their prey, they're not like announcing their presence, and like they're very quiet and they're sneaky and they have like a strategy. Like they're very intelligent. I would say that's something people forget. They act like these animals are stupid and like, oh, these humans are going to outsmart them, no problem. I don't know. I don't know about that. They're smart and they've been living in the wild for a long time and they know how to adapt. That's the other thing. I think that a lot of animals are very adaptable, and that is not talked about a lot. You know, like they'll stall an animal with like a predator animal with something really simple in a book or something. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, you watch one documentary, you know, a big cat can jump that distance or climb that tree or whatever. So yeah, I think that's where the research kind of comes in. And if you're going to be world building your pets, like you would world build your world, wow, words are great today. It's probably important to have some notes about like what kind of predator or prey they're going to be, how they attack, and like maybe you're not going to use all that stuff, but it will help with like the making it more realistic for the reader.
What are some examples of well-written animals in fiction? And if you have something about like why are they particularly well-written, you can add that, but let us know.
It was hard to think of, just because I feel like when animals are well written as more background, then they stay in the background. So it's like, oh, that story was really great, and I was never bumped out of it due to like an inaccuracy. So it's like might have had animals, but now I don't remember which ones did. The ones that feature animals, I remember I really liked The Rats of Nim when I was a kid, and my daughter reads books called Adventures of Sophie Mouse by Poppy Green. They're like kids chapter books where the main character is a mouse and she has a friend that's a frog and a friend that's a snake. And I feel like they do animals overall pretty well, because it's like, you know, the frog's best subject in school is jumping and things like that. So they've grounded the kids' talents and like how they solve problems with their own little animal abilities like fairly well. So those are really enjoyable to read.
Yeah, I think actually a lot of kids' books are going to be, or middle grade are going to be a good place to research this, because I find that animal sidekicks and that show up a lot more in like middle grade and stuff like that. Of course, they're always in my stories, but you know, whatever. So I have a couple ones I thought were done really well. So in Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, there's a dog whose name I've forgotten. But anyway, he was a great character. He had presence and personality, and he was a big dog, and he was often in the scene or near the scene. And so he was a character in himself, but he never took over too much page time, which was great for the story. I recommend this constantly. The Paladin series by T. Kingfisher, and also Swordheart by T. Kingfisher. They're set in the same world, and there's some animal characters that speak, and like they're part of the story, like any of the human characters. And then there's some that are just animals. And the oxes are written quite well. They're so funny. They're so stubborn. I love that. And this is a bit of a random book I read a while ago. I had to look it up to see, because I remembered why I liked it, but couldn't remember the name of it. But anyway, it's called Scales and Sensibility by Stephanie Burgess, and it has lap dragons. And it's like a Regency romance kind of setup, and they have lap dragons. And they're very like, it's something like, they're very pretty and stuff. So they become like kind of an accessory for like the wealthy, but like the main character gets one that like gets like scared, and it like leaves its like little gel, which I think is supposed to be like poo, behind it when it gets nervous. And it's just like the cutest thing ever. So the dragons are kind of their own character in that too. But yeah, I thought that one was well done, especially if you want to do smaller dragons. I thought that was a really good example.
That's fun. I want one now.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, I'm going to ask this question, but I don't really mean it. Do I need to own a pet to get better at writing animals? And then what are other ways to improve aside from reading more examples of exceptional writing?
No, you don't need to own a pet. The same way you don't need to like know how to sword fight or like sail a boat or perform surgery to be able to include those in your novels. But then really research is key, right? So asking friends that either like hang out in person with their pets or ask them what it's like to have a pet, reading, research, all that kind of stuff. You can also sometimes be able to secure the time of like a zookeeper or a wildlife biologist. Just be mindful that those people are usually extremely busy. I think if you're gonna try to chat with someone in the wildlife industry, usually the best thing to do is like go to a zoo or aquarium, and after there's a show, they usually have a bit of like a Q&A time where the person will linger, and sometimes it's the trainer or keeper that's staying behind. Sometimes it's an education person, but they're just as knowledgeable. And then you can ask them all of your kind of like burning questions. And sometimes you can be like, hey, I would really love to know more. Is there someone I can email just for more of that like direct information? So sometimes people are forthcoming, just be respectful. But I think that's a way to go, is just to talk to like people who like have animals as pets or work in the wildlife industry.
Yeah, I totally agree. And like, yeah, going to the aquarium or something like that is a great idea. That actually just sounds fun in general, but that's a really good way to go observe lots of different types of animals. But yeah, definitely talking to people that have them. And yeah, usually if you've got like more in-depth questions, be like, can I pick your brain about this? And have a few like, concise questions for them. Because I always tell people they can ask me things about horses, but before you come ask me things about horses, make sure you've done a little bit of your own research before you come talking to me, because there's a lot of stuff that you can find on the internet or documentaries, whatever, videos, to do a little bit of your own prep work before you go asking these people questions so that you're not wasting their time or your time, and you can get way better answers if you do a little bit of prep. Like, someone comes up to me and is like, well, like, how big are horses usually? And I'm like, oh, like, I know they've got like 30 more questions to go. And I'm like, the first 10 are all really basic. So that's something to consider too. And yeah, like Maya said, being respectful of people's time is pretty important.
Yeah, that's a really good point. How many animals is too many in a story?
Depends on what your story is about, really. I feel like if your story is about an ecosystem and it's kind of like man versus nature, then what the animals, like how they affect the ecosystem, how they like propagate its growth, how they affect its like decomposition, like predators in the ecosystem, prey you could like also eat, like food sources, like all that kind of stuff, things you might like compete with an animal for, those are all going to be relevant to your plot. I think if it's like, you're in a dragon flying school and then you have to wait for your friend to go shovel the massive pile of poop and you can just comment that it's like going to take a while because it's a lot of, like, those are all world building things that are relevant to your plot. But I think if your story is not directly about animals, then really like any number is going to be too many because it's just not relevant, even though we all love to like kind of linger on the cat or dog or fairy or dragon or whatever kind of like little creature it's going to be. But I think just like keeping your plot in mind is probably going to help you inform how many is too many.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's definitely the author's choice. Like, if you're writing a story where the animals themselves are characters that speak and do things in the world and drive the plot forward, then like you can have as many as you want. But I would caution you to be like, just with anything, not overwhelm the reader with so many things that they maybe don't need to learn or know about. If you're just talking like pets or mythical animals that stay mostly in the background, then it's kind of whatever works for the story. And you don't want to overload the reader with too many pets to remember, especially if they don't speak, because then it's getting tough. They're just sort of side characters that aren't as important. So like, if I were to write like a character with like 3 dogs, like I used to have 3 dogs, like that might be excessive to get into their characterization, and they would be kind of talked about in more of a general sense, and like, you know what I mean? But that could be too many for people who might just skim over that section. So yeah, it will depend on the story, and it depends on what your plot's doing. So definitely author's choice.
Fair. This is reminding me of the Golden Compass series. Did either of you read that one?
Oh yes, I read the first book of that one.
Because everyone I think has like a kind of animal familiar in that one, right? It's making me want to go back and read it. But those ones were sentient, so they could communicate with whoever they were tied to. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on those, like sentient animals, talking animals, how you feel about those in stories, where you've seen them done well or poorly. I'm thinking of Aragon does the dragons, like talking into the dragon rider's mind kind of thing, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think sentient animals can be really fun, or like animal connections. I would say, because I am in the biology field, sometimes my brain ruins it a little bit for me. So I love like characters with animal connections, or that kind of like bonded, like in Fourth Wing, they can like communicate with their dragons, things like that. I think that helps, like that's good to keep me in the story. But animal stories like Zootopia, where it's like, this is an entire like sentient animal, like the hoofstock are now not on all fours, they're walking on like 2 legs. Like, it's a fun kids movie, and it does not need to be overthought. And they did think of some of those like predator-prey relationships, different habitats. Like, they have put a lot of thought into it, but my brain is like, but the hoofstock is supposed to be on 4 legs and now they're on 2. So like, is that really hard on their joints, and do their joints get swollen? And it just like, for me, it's like, takes me out of the story. So I think I kind of draw the line as like at like total animal worlds for myself. But that doesn't mean those stories aren't great. Like kids usually really love them. Some like Animal Farm, right, is one where like that had a really poignant message and was done like through sentient animals. So it can be done really well. I think personally, I tend to like the animal connection and like I wouldn't write a sentient animal story myself. It's not my jam.
Fair.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I love them, and for the most part, I can turn parts of my brain off for some animals, but not all. And I'm horses mostly. I'm like, no, that's wrong. But a book that I'm thinking of, I think that did that well, is a middle grade book called Into the Land of the Unicorns, and the Bruce Colville, I believe, is the writer, and that one is done pretty well, where like the unicorn can share its thoughts with the girl that's ended up there, and he can tell her, you know, things she needs to know for the story, but he's also like her buddy and like everything like that, and there's things that he doesn't like or things he won't answer, and I think that that was well done. And I do have some animals like this in my stories. I'm thinking of one of my books where the horse can communicate with its person, essentially, anyone if it wants, but he doesn't want to talk to anybody else, which is funny. So that is something that works well too. The thing that can sometimes get confusing with that I have learned is like, how do you portray the animal's thoughts or how they speak in a way that comes across as like a bit different than your regular people dialogue, so people don't get confused. But that one I'm still sort of working on. I believe in Into the Land of the Unicorns, he had all the unicorns' thoughts like in italics, and he sort of like set the scene up so that we could tell that they were talking to each other. So yeah, there's a little bit of stuff to work around with that, what would work. But yeah, I do like them quite a lot. And yeah, I think I have them in almost all my stories. Maybe they can't speak to their person, but they're definitely pretty magical.
Fun. Yeah, I think Aragon does the italics for the dragons speaking as well. So that's a good way to do it.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to do it. As long as it's not getting confused with the character's inner thoughts, then I think it works really well. That was the mistake or the thing I ran into with mine. I was like, oh, how can I make sure that it's obvious that it's him saying that and not her thinking it? So that's something too.
I think it also would be an interesting conversation or thing to think about it in terms of like character voice. Like we talk about when you're writing for multi-POV, you want to make your character voices distinct enough that even if you don't have all the context, you can tell whose perspective you're reading from. And we talk about that for dialogue too, that like different characters' dialogue should read a bit differently. Like it shouldn't all sound like the same person speaking. So with the animals, what are ways that we can do that to differentiate?
Ooh, I would say like animals maybe they would have a different tone, and they'd probably use different word choices.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of how I would do it myself. Like I always assume that if horses could speak, they would have like a slightly more formal way of talking, because they seem like these like kind of like, you know, we've been riding them for so long and they've lived through so many ages with us as like our pets and our transportation and stuff. I feel like they would have like a bit of that old school like British accent, sort of like do not do that, like that. Whereas I think dogs are be more like, oh my god, hi, like they'd be like more casual, and that kind of thing. So yeah, and you could also have animals too that wouldn't maybe speak as much as like a human would speak. So when they do talk in the book, you don't have to worry, like their voice is going to be really distinct because they're not like info dumping on anybody. And you can make them have their own personality, I think is important. Like some animals are a little bit more like shy, and some of them are really like, hey, what's up? And some are grumpy, some are fake grumpy. Looking at my horse right now. She gives me like the fake grump, and then I get closer and she's like, just kidding, I love you. So there's stuff like that you can write into that would make the voice feel really unique for the animals.
Yeah, the only one I can think of right now is Aragon as an example, because I know there's the dragons, and then there's these like prophetic cats. There's a cat creature in those books that I can't remember what it's called, but they're kind of weird and mystical. And the voices are very distinct. And I think the way that like the dragons describe things when like Saphira is trying to explain something to Aragon or tell him about something, she'll like use different comparisons than a human would and like think about the world differently. So that's that would be an interesting
how they view the
exercise.
world will be different, especially if you're using something like cats or dogs too, because they're so much lower to the ground and they see the world from a literal different perspective.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a good point too.
All right, our last two questions are for fun. But so it's a two-parter. The first one is if you could have any real life animal that actually exists as a pet, and money, food, the fear of being mauled to death, not an issue, which one would you want? And then the second question is the same, but for a fictional animal, so like a dragon or a unicorn or something.
I would have a nudibranch as a pet, which is a sea slug. And that doesn't sound very exciting, but you need to lick them up and fall in love with them, as I have. And it's like, oh, I'll just have a sea slug as a pet. No, because you need like a saltwater aquarium, like a big one with like flow and like phytoplankton for them to eat and like sea pens for them to eat and sponges for them to eat, depending on like what species of nudibranch it is. So they're very complex to keep.
Oh my gosh, that's so cool.
So if money and every space aquarium keeping abilities were not an object, I would have like every nudibranch species I could possibly find because
oh my gosh, that's
them.
So funny. See, I have a hard time with this question because if you put a nature documentary on in front of me, I'd be like, I want that one and I want that one and I want them all to come live with me somehow. But I think when it comes down to it, I'd probably get like a big cat, and I'm not fussy about which one. It just has to be an enormous cat, like a tiger, like a jaguar or something. And I know that's not feasible. I can see Maya being like, that thing would kill you. But you know, death by murder mittens, giant murder mittens. There's a TikTok account I follow. They're like a rescue conservatory, I think in the States maybe, and they do big cats, and they have all these great videos of them because they obviously trust their keepers and stuff, of them like purring and they like flex their feet just like house cats do, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I would just love to have one of these.
Yep. Well,
So
and being
cute.
mauled to death, like I said, is no issue. So
it's
no
fictional
biggie.
question, then it's no problem.
yeah, I was gonna say big cat because tiger's always been my favorite animal, but I think I'd actually want a bear. Because they're big
Ooh,
and
yeah.
they're fuzzy, and I want to cuddle it. I want to just curl up, and it would hold me against his tummy, and it would be perfect.
That actually
what I
sounds
want,
great.
right?
Maybe I would like a bear.
And
Maybe
then we could
can I have
hibernate
both.
together. Oh,
Oh, the
best
hibernation would
friends
be the best
forever.
part. I love it.
Okay, part 2, fictional animals.
I would have a Pegasus because a flying horse
yeah.
would be awesome. I've always loved horses, but I feel like unicorns like it's just too pointy with the horn. So I would
It's
do a
dangerous.
Pegasus, yeah.
The horn would be
Yeah,
dangerous.
and then you could fly
Yeah.
and like still have a horse, and then I just feel like it's the best combination of all the things.
Okay, I like that because I have horses, but I picked a dragon. So it's sort of like slightly crazier version of what you picked. Well, I always joke that Ledoux is a dragon. She even has her own personalized bonnet because she wears these little bonnets in the ring because she doesn't like noise, and it has a dragon embroidered on it. So one of her nicknames is Dragon. So I feel like she's as close to a real life dragon that I can imagine for riding anyway. So I think, I would probably want a dragon, but maybe not something much bigger than Ledoux. I'm not very tall, and I'm not getting any younger either. So I think something that's like not too big would be great. Since we're talking like dream fantasy creatures. Okay.
I've been trying to think of like a magical alternative to a bear, and I can't think of one. Because that's all I want. I just want a big cuddly something.
I'm thinking again of one of the Paladin books. You could shapeshift. Dexter needs to become a shapeshifting bear, and then you can have the best of both worlds.
That's genius.
Magic creature, bear, husband,
so I
all in
chose
one.
the bear and the man.
Yeah.
I love this because I think if Nick had to be any animal, he would be a brown bear. That's who he is. Yeah, definitely a brown bear.
I think Dexter would be a monkey, so there go my dreams.
Oh, that's funny. I love
My
it.
husband had to answer that question for a business thing once, and he was like, I would be an iguana because I get to sit in the sun all day, and no one was impressed with that answer because everyone else was like, I would be a wolf, and he's like, an iguana.
Iguana sounds great.
Like,
here. Why, if you could pick a relaxing animal life after your stressful human life, wouldn't you pick that?
Exactly.
Right? I would pick something relaxing as well. Lay in the sun all day and then scare tourists when they get too close. That sounds pretty good.
I would still pick a bear. I want to hibernate, people.
Exactly.
Yes.
Hibernation is great.
Yeah.
Okay. That is the end of our questions. That was super fun. Mm-hmm. And at the tail end, as usual, we like to do book recommendations. So I'm going to chime in very briefly. I mentioned the Golden Compass series. If you like sentient animals with relationships, each human kind of has their own animal. That one was really interesting. I don't remember how well the animal details were included or not, because it's been a long time since I read it, but I liked that series. And then another one I thought of was, I believe the first book is called Silverwing. It's a series by Kenneth Opel about bats. And it's like, it goes so deep into how bats work, but in a fictional way where they have they talk and they have thoughts and feelings and they're doing all these different things. And it's just such an adventure and so well done. But it has been a while since I read that one too. So I'll leave this largely to both of you, because the only other books I can think of with animals are Maria's, and those are not yet published. Yeah. So
one day we can recommend them.
I want to be realsies. Just read Maria's stuff. There you go. Golden Standard. But then you can't read them because I only get that privilege.
Exactly.
Because I haven't gotten my shit together yet.
You're doing fine.
It is happening. It's
You're doing
slowly
just
happening.
Fine.
It is slowly happening though.
I think for my recommendations, it was just the little kids chapter books with Sophie Mess, but we were also talking earlier about Pony Pals and Thoroughbred and Saddle Club. Those are my childhood favorites. They're great. So those are my recommendations too.
Yeah, man, I loved my horse books. I had so many, and I'm sad that I told my mom she could give them away to other horse crazy kids, and now I'm like, I miss my 100 books in the Thoroughbred collection. I wish I could read those again.
Oh, and Heartland too. That was another good horse series as well.
I didn't get into reading Heartland, but we did watch it because it's filmed in Alberta and stuff. And I love that kind of stuff. Okay, so my recommendations, try not to recommend the ones I've already talked about, but I will. For fantasy romance, Paladin Strength by T. Kingfisher. It's book 2 in that series. And just thought that was super well done. There's a bear in it, and it's very, very well written. I thought it was super. For contemporary romance, I really loved Whiskey Business by Elliot Fletcher. It was just beautifully done. The dogs are kind of characters on their own, and they blend in seamlessly. They're not necessarily in the background. They show up. They're part of the characters' lives, but they don't take over, which I think is great. And for historical romance, the Bells of London series by Mimi Matthews. So she's an avid dressage rider in real life. And so she gets the horse girl vibes perfectly. And she nails Regency England. She nails the romance. It's just a great series. And it's a good example of having animals in the story without them being the main part of the story.
Well, that is the tea. Maya, thanks for being here. We appreciated you jumping in on the first pages and all the animal things, and I feel like I learned a lot. And I will probably come to both of you with more questions later whenever I decide to write about bears.
Thanks for having me on.
I want you to write about bears next. I'm so excited. And that's the tea on where writers go wrong when it comes to writing animals. If you want more of the Tea Grannies, you can join our Patreon and follow us on our socials at the Tea Grannies Podcast. Happy writing.